千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together.
So let me start by reading it from beginning to end. Know the masculine, hold to the feminine. Be the watercourse of the world. Being the watercourse of the world, the eternal virtue does not depart. Return to the state of the infant. Know the white, hold to the black. Be the standard of the world. Being the standard of the world, the eternal virtue does not deviate. Return to the state of the boundless. Know the honor, hold to the humility. Be the valley of the world. Being the valley of the world, the eternal virtue shall be sufficient. Return to the state of plain wood. Plain wood splits, then become tools. The sages utilize them and then become leaders. Thus, the greater whole is undivided. All right. So, toward the end of this chapter, in the concluding section, it can be more difficult to understand. It can probably require some guidance. That's not a problem. But first, I want to start out by identifying some repeating parts in this chapter so you can see the hidden sectional divisions for yourself. Let's start with the following. Take a look at the characters in red and notice that they are repeating themselves. So you'll see the same characters in line 1 as you would in 6 and 11. So in the translation, you see that lines 1, 6, and 11 all start out with the word know, to know something. And that is indeed what the first character of those lines mean. 知, same character, same meaning. So the second part of these lines, there's a little break in between, and then the same 3-character format. You've got the character shou, which is repeated again 3 times, and in the translation, it corresponds to hold. So all 3 lines are saying you have to know something and then hold something else. So that's the pattern. So already we can see that these are well-defined patterns. There's lines 1 to 5, and then lines 6 to 10. So then we can guess that after that, we should have another section from 11 to 15. So 1 to 5, that forms a section. This is our hypothetical section division. And then we have a second section there consisting of lines 6 to 10. Then we have the third section, 11 to 15. So then naturally 16 to 19, the last 4 lines, form the concluding section. Okay, so there's more correspondence. So notice that in 1, 6, and 11, they are essentially the same, except for the third and last character, respectively. Those are all different. So I'll explain what those are. But forget these 3 matching lines for just a moment. Forget 1, 6, and 11 for just a moment. I want to highlight another thing for your attention that is also repeated. Let's take a look at this. Lines 2 and 3, you see a lot of repeating characters. The first 3 characters repeat. 7 and 8, hey, same thing. Those are the same characters, and they're the same characters as 2 and 3. Same with 12 and 13. So this reinforces the idea that we have 3 repeating sections where many of the characters are the same. So poetically, it's the same structure. Is there more? Well, yes. So before we move on, let me also point out that the last character in all these lines, in these 6 lines that have been highlighted, the last characters are different. They are 3 groups of 2 characters, 2 repeating characters each, as you can see. And of course, I will explain what those characters mean. But that's what makes them different. So there's more. Let me also draw your attention to one last correspondence between the 3 sections. So let's take a look at 4, 5, 9, 10, 14, and 15. So notice how the first 2 characters of line 4 repeat themselves in line 9 and line 14. So that's part of the repeating poetic structure. And then the first 3 characters of line 5 repeat themselves in line 10 and line 15. So there you go. And when we line up all the repeating characters in the 3 sections together, it becomes quite obvious that everything that I'm highlighting here in red serves as a repeating framework. And the variations are in the characters that are still in black from lines 1 to 15. I think everyone can follow that, right? Even without knowing what those characters are, you can see the repetition. So some subtle points to note is that if you look at line 4 and line 9, they're in the same position. They actually have another repeating character in the 3rd character position. But those repetitions don't repeat down in line 14. It's a little bit different. That's number 1. Number 2, in line 5, we have 2 characters there, meaning infant. In line 10, we have the last 2 characters, meaning 无极, without boundary, boundless, infinite. And then the last character in line 15 is a single character. So that's not a perfect match poetically, but there's enough of a match in the rest of it that you can tell that our division is correct. So just looking at the Chinese initially, this is far from obvious, but once it's highlighted like this, I think everyone can see it. So you don't actually need to be a master of ancient Chinese to be able to tell. Now, let me point out the variations, the variables. In line 1, you've got the know something, hold to something else. And then line 6, the same. Line 11, the same. So what I've done here is that I have circled, highlighted the variations in 1, 6, and 11. So what is this about? Well, all 3 lines are really saying the same thing. All 3 lines essentially are about knowing the yang principle and then holding on to the yin principle. The yang principle is the overt, the surface level, the external manifestations. And it applies to every aspect of life. The yin principle is the subtle principle, the deeper levels, the internal manifestations. So in line 1, notice that the yang principle, the active, the obvious, that's the masculine. And then the yin manifestation, as you would expect, is the feminine, and that's reflected in the translation. So in line 6, you have the Mandarin character for white and the Mandarin character for black. So I think it's obvious, I think it should be evident that when Lao Tzu wrote these words, he was certainly not talking about race. He was not talking about white people, black people, stuff like that. No, white and black had a completely different context when he wrote it. The white was that which was visible, that which was easily seen. The black would be like darkness, like nighttime, that is hidden, that is unseen or not readily visible. So that again is the yin principle. And the white, quote unquote, the obvious, the high profile, that's the yang principle. Nothing to do with race or ethnicity. So lastly, line 11, you've got, check the translation, you've got honor and humility. So honor is in the context of someone being honored like awards ceremony. So that is very yang in that it is a show for everyone. It's a spotlight being shown on someone. Humility, the opposite, is the retreating from spotlight, is the lack of a need to bring attention to oneself. So that's the yin principle. So you can expect that the 3 sections will repeat that same pattern in different ways. Starts out with one way to talk about yin and yang, or more specifically, it starts with yang and then it talks about yin. And the second section, the same way. The third section, the same way. So we're going to, so what we'll do is that we will dig into the first section, use that as the template. We will use that as the template to understand the other 2. By understanding the first one really well, we will then apply the same understanding to sections 2 and 3. Now, another aspect of it is the end results in the 3 sections. So what I've done here is that I've circled 5, 10, and 15 to showcase that for everyone. So if you take a look at line 5, it says return to the state of the infant. Line 10 says return to the state of the boundless. And line 15, return to the state of plain wood. So what I would like to ask everyone to do is to, in your mind, draw an equal sign between infant and boundless and plain wood. There are actually 3 different ways to talk about the same thing. And that same thing is about you as you originally are, as you originally exist as consciousness. So I'm addressing that consciousness directly now. I'm addressing you directly. I'm talking about the real lessons of you living this life. So we're going to have a deeper discussion on what that means, the process that you have gone through from the moment that you were born to this present moment, you know, everything that entails, and what Lao Tzu is trying to get at when he says to return to that state. Now, he certainly does not mean that you have to revert to a childish, mental state. He's talking about how we can get back to that state of unlimited potential and power. And there's a specific way to do that, one that I think will bring you a lot of joy. So that's the reason why we're doing all this. So I'm very excited to be taking on this mini journey with you to explore this chapter in great depth and detail so that we can understand exactly how we can get there from here. Here is where we're talking about this. We've been living life for some time. We want to get back. We want to get back certain things that we have lost, you know, that state of innocence, that sense of wonder that we all used to have. We want to get back to that power that we used to wield, the possibilities, the imagination. But we're not quite there yet. Let's begin by exploring the first line. Know the masculine, hold to the feminine. So this is where we establish the basic method of Tao cultivation. And masculine is the yang, and feminine is the yin and yang symbol. Okay, so what does that mean? We're specifically calling them out as male and female energies, so not as men and women. Male and female energies are what we all possess. Everyone has both yin and yang within them. So regardless of who you are, whether you are male or female, you must master both energies in interacting with people. That's what it's trying to say. So know the yang energy, the yang manifestations in interactions with others, but also hold to the yin principle when that is appropriate. So another way to think of it is that to learn, you learn from the obvious manifestations in life. Now, when you actually put it into practice, it can be much more subtle. It doesn't have to be very obvious that you are practicing what you're practicing, because what you do can be very seamless. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about what this actually means in social interactions. If I just say, know the yang, but hold to the yin, that's very abstract. There's not a whole lot to really get your hands on to be more real. So that's what I want to do, is to make it more real by using a whole bunch of examples. So imagine yourself in social interactions with other people. Ideally, what Lao Tzu says is that you want to have a mixture, a balanced way of both yin and yang as you go about this. And that means that, number one, whether you are male or female, that you know how to take the initiative, that you know how to push ahead, you know how to be decisive, make decisions, you know how to be action-oriented. You know how to do all this when that is the appropriate things to do. So there are moments that call for action. There are moments that call for you stepping up to the plate, that it's your turn. It's your turn to speak. It's your turn to act. It's the right time to take action or say a few words. Then you want to seize the moment and say what you have to say. Do what you need to do. So know the masculine, know the yang principle in that sense. At the same time, the balanced mixture of yin and yang energy also means that holding on to the skill of yielding at the right time. You know, as you push forward, push ahead, push, there comes a time when skillfully you should yield and give other people a chance to speak, to act, to shine. Give everyone plenty of room, backing away, backing off, leaving that possibility open. You want to have the skill to be flexible, and the skill also in being patient at the right time. Sometimes after, a series of actions that you undertake, you come upon an opportunity to practice patience. That is, you have to wait for the next thing, the next opportunity to act. So that would be a great moment to practice the Tao of observation, to step back, look around at the world, have a better view of what is going on to help you determine your next steps. So being flexible, having the patience to wait when it is appropriate to do so. So let's use an example, and here I'm gonna fall back to what I know from decades ago as a young man in a dating situation. Now that I look back on that, across the span of many years, I kind of wish that I knew the right way to approach. I kind of wish I knew the Tao of bringing both yin and yang energies to the mix. Because ideally, I should have known when to approach, when to suggest a date, when to strike up a conversation, make her laugh, have a good time, enjoy that energy of interaction between two people, and then suggest, hey, maybe coffee, hey, maybe dinner. So that probing, that initiative in taking action, that's yang energy. So very appropriate for a young man who's just heading out into the world of dating, maybe not having a lot of experience, but wanting to impress his date. Now the other part of it, the yin energy, can be just as important. If you push, if you are too forward, if you are fresh, that's actually a big turnoff. So knowing when to back off, knowing when to be a gentleman, knowing when to be polite and courteous, equally important. So right off the bat, from dating, I think everyone can associate, identify with this as an example, that you should know the masculine, hold to the feminine. And here's another thing that I wish I knew at that age. Before the date, young men should have a plan in mind, yang, about where to go, what to do. And that's actually the same advice that I would provide to teenagers now who are just starting to explore dating. Younger people, what I would advise to the guys is that, okay, gentlemen, have a plan, have something in mind. In my opinion, the worst thing you can do is to show up and, so what do you want to go? What do you want to do? Do you have a restaurant in mind? You want to maybe watch a movie? Okay, which movie? Where's the theater? Okay. If you do that, probably 9 times out of 10, the date's not going to go well. So I need people stepping into this, especially younger guys who are just as clueless as I was a long time ago, is to start with a plan. That's the yang aspect of it. But while you know the plan, know the yang, you also want to hold to the yin. That is to say, you want to remain open to the spontaneous. That's what makes dating fun. You want to improvise, change the plan around when necessary. You don't want to stick to something that's, meticulously planned out and very rigid, and any variation from that is going to put you off. That is also not going to result in a successful date. So I think those of you who have experience with teenage awkwardness, as I had, you can totally understand where I'm going with this. So most importantly, a sense of fun. So that's the original purpose of what all this is. So using this example, a dating situation, which is a social scenario, applying the Tao to that, using both the yin and yang energies, resulting in maximum chance of success, maximum chance of you having a good time with your date. Whether it leads to anything or not, like a relationship, that's actually kind of beside the point. The point is you want to enjoy that moment. You want to enjoy the good time. So I will trust everyone can extend and expand from there to apply it to all different kinds of social situations, like going out with your friends and such. For now, though, I want to move on to the next couple of lines. So before I get started with this, I think you can see that that line 2 and 3 are actually the same characters. So I'll remark on that in just a moment. For now, I want to focus on the very last character of lines 2 and 3. Okay, what is that character? Now, most people in listening to this don't know Mandarin or ancient Chinese, so you wouldn't be able to tell what the character is anyway. But I can tell you that this character is used in ancient times, but not so much in modern Mandarin. And it is pronounced xi. What does it mean? Well, looking at the translation, you probably say, okay, well, it's probably the watercourse. That's how it's translated. So let's talk about the literal meaning. This character literally means flowing water, which can be a river, a stream, a creek, in the center of the valley, in the middle of the valley. The middle of the valley is the lowest point. So that means all of the smaller streams from the mountains and hills surrounding the valley, they flow to the center of the valley. They congregate, they aggregate together. They all flow together in a nexus point. So that is what this character is. So because of that, it's been extrapolated to mean something more. It's been extrapolated to mean a centralizing point where social interactions flow together. So think of, so it's sort of like describing the center of social life, but more than that, it's describing someone living in society, interacting with friends, acquaintances, total strangers in some cases, that this person still is someone who receives from multiple sources, someone who is attracting from multiple people, that people, when you master Tao like this, using both yin and yang energy, you become somebody who has the ability to attract others to you. You don't necessarily have to do anything. That's what it means to be the watercourse, the center of social life. People come to you. You don't need to go to them. So now I want to talk about the repetition of the characters by highlighting the two lines. And so I want to point out, as everyone can see, that the characters are exactly the same. 2 and 3, these are exactly the same line repeated twice. So when characters are repeated twice, not lines, characters, when characters are repeated twice, in Mandarin, that's used for emphasis. So kai, the character for open in Mandarin, can be used as an adjective for something that's open. But if I say kai kai, if I repeat it twice, that means it becomes an adjective that is emphasized openness, or in other words, wide open. what we would say wide open. So that can be unfamiliar to native speakers of English because we don't necessarily say open, open, right? We don't have that as one of our rules of grammar. Now, let me point out though that we do have that informally when we speak. So, example, I go to the library to return a book. So when I return this book, the librarian notices that this book can be renewed. So I can renew for another few weeks borrowing this book. So librarian is asking me, do you want to return checkout or just return? And the librarian may say, are you trying to return or return checkout or return renew? And then I understand exactly what this means. Sometimes we speak in that way, and I'll say, no, thank you. I'm trying to return. You know, I'm repeating it twice to emphasize that, yeah, I just want to put it back on the shelves, make it available for other people. So I find similarities and differences in languages absolutely fascinating. So, and there's more than expected, there's times when we speak in similar ways as the people do in ancient China. All right, so let's bring our attention back to this particular line. There's an important point that I want to make here. This line is repeated twice with the same characters, but because of the context of this section, the meaning of each line is slightly different. It's different not in characters, but in contextual meaning based on its position in the section. I know that sounds confusing. Let me explain. Here's what line 2 means. You see the translation. You see line 2 means be the watercourse of the world. Let's talk about what it means if we were to explain. Line 2 means you should be the one who naturally attracts everyone, like the watercourse that many streams flow into. You should be like that. Okay, so that's clear. Be that. You should be the watercourse of the world, which is exactly what the translation says. You should be that. Now, let's explore line 3. Same characters, slightly different meaning. So here's what line 3 means. If you can be like that, if you can be like the watercourse that recedes from many streams, if you can be the person who naturally just attracts others to you, then blah, blah, blah. Then it's basically setting up the next 2 lines to talk about how this will take you to the Tao, take you to a primal state that is identified with constant virtue and the Tao. So I think that's clear to everyone now. Line 2 is you should be that, and then line 3 is if you can be that, then something else. So remember, characters are the same, context is different depending on the position within the section. So it's setting up the next 2 lines to express the idea that Tao cultivation is not a solitary activity. So remember, here we're talking about social interactions. This particular section here, right off the bat, this is going to tell you that many of the New Age ideas that you have encountered, for instance, about this sage living in the mountains, living in a remote place like the mountains, like a hermit, that's completely wrong. This is something that I've been saying for a very long time, but I think, you know, stereotypically, we still have depictions in the media about this ancient philosopher who lives alone up in the mountains somewhere. So in actual, authentic Tao tradition, that's not a sage. That's a hermit. That hermit may not understand the Tao more than you do. In fact, probably quite the opposite. So not a solitary activity. You must be among people. You must be with people. because positive interactions with people, meaning that you help them, support them, guide them, nurture them, all those positive interactions with people, that's what's going to lead you to the Tao. That's the path of cultivation. So our path of Tao cultivation is exactly like that. We need one another in order to advance ourselves. That's exactly what we're doing here every Sunday. So what happens if you are able to interact with people, attract them to you, guide them, help them, nurture them? What then? Well, we get to line 4. So line 4 talks about the eternal virtue does not depart. What does that mean? So when you practice virtue, what happens is that it becomes more and more natural to you, like second nature. So when that happens, when you are constantly skillfully wielding yin and yang in your interactions with others, in time, it becomes a natural part of you. So when that is the case, when they are a natural part of you, your virtues make you always virtuous in that you don't have to think about it. You don't have to remind yourself to be virtuous. So to be virtuous constantly is what we mean by eternal virtue. You always have it. It would only be strange if you didn't have it. That's number 1. And number 2, because they have become a part of you, you can never lose them. And that's what it means when it says never departs, does not depart. So altogether, constant, always, always on, you don't have to turn it on, never departs, never leave you. That's what it means to attain the Tao. All right, so we just got done talking about what it means to have eternal virtue that does not depart. You know, on the face of it, it's a little bit puzzling. What? It's kind of abstract. But as soon as we explain it in terms of your virtues having become second nature to you, have totally natural part of you, then it makes a lot of sense that indeed that virtue has become eternal in the sense of being always there, and that you can't lose it. You can't lose what you are. So it will never depart. So that makes total sense now. Let's move on to the next line. Next line is about return to the state of the infant. This is important. This establishes the pattern that we're going to follow for the rest of this chapter. So we need to pay more attention to it. So first of all, let's talk about the state of the infant. What does the infant stand for? Okay, from our discussion in the last chapter, 27, we now know that this is not to be taken literally. We understand that. We know Lao Tzu is not saying that you physically revert to the age of an infant, that it's not about that at all, and it wouldn't make sense. It would not pass the real world test. It would not be a practical advice for living life. So we know the infant is metaphorical. So here's what it means. State of the infant means the most primal and pure you, your original essence, your true self. So this is important to me because this is what I am addressing most of all in our talk today. So let me talk first about what it means to return to the state of the infant. To return to the state is to reconnect with the inner child, the core of your being that still retains your original playfulness, your sense of wonder, joy, creativity. So when you were that little, when you were in that pure primal state, you had unfettered creativity. You were phenomenal in coming up with your imagination, all kinds of things. So the news is that you still can. We've forgotten what it means to be in that state, but it's possible to get back to that. So you can think of this as enlightenment, but it's actually a little bit different than enlightenment in the Buddhist sense. So it isn't so much an awakening to a greater reality, which is what is meant when a Buddhist talks about enlightenment. It's more like rediscovering what you've always had, but have forgotten or neglected along the way. I hope everyone understands that difference. So you can think of it as spiritual enlightenment, but it's definitely a different take on that from a Tao perspective. So this is not the Buddhist perspective. So to remind everyone, focusing on line 5, which is where we are right now, state of the infant. So remember I talked about how line 5 corresponds to line 10 and corresponds to line 15. So the last two characters, infant, corresponds to the two characters, Wuji, and also corresponds to Pu, the last character in 15. This is another way to note that at the end of a chapter, of a particular chapter, it wraps back to the beginning. So if you take a look at line 16, you will notice that the last character of line 15 is the first character of line 16. So line 16 carries on the discussion about Pu, which means plain wood. And that is meant to go all the way back to section 1 when it talks about returning to the state of the infant. So taking a look at these big arrows here, just imagine that at the very end, it goes back to the beginning. That's the way it should be. That's the correct way to look at it. Now, let's talk about your life, everybody. Let's address the main topic today. I want to talk about your life. So in the beginning, and when I say the beginning, I'm talking about the beginning of your life. I'm talking about when you were born. So here I'm going to bring in a picture of an infant. So let's keep in mind that we all used to be an infant. We all went through that stage. We were all born. We were all plain wood. So infant is equated to plain wood that has the maximum potentiality to become different things, but had not yet been worked on, hadn't been carved into anything. So let me put that up on the screen. You are the plain wood. You have not yet been shaped into something specific because you were an infant. Now, as an infant, in that stage, you did not know anything about all the negative things that you will come across later on in life. Things like cruelty, violence, discrimination, desires, materialistic pursuits, lies, deception, striving, contrivance, exhaustion. So this is before you became tainted by the various things in the material world. So one of the biggest illusions that we're taught as we come into the material world is the idea of separation. We lose sight of the essential oneness of humanity. We forget about our connection with one another, and we begin to assume that everyone is separated from one another and different from one another. And when we're different, then one person must be higher, the other person must be lower. Hence, discrimination. That discrimination can manifest along different lines, not only the racial lines that usually the term is applied to, but also in terms of class, in terms of different levels of society, the difference in wealth and power from the top 1% to the rest of society. So there's a lot of things that happen to us along the way. But let me go back to what it was when you were born and shortly after that, when you began to gain awareness of yourself and the world. So let me talk about like a few years into your life when you were a young child. Remember back in those days when you initially were not quite sure what you wanted to be when you grow up. Probably back then, there were many things that you found to be interesting. So you saw them as possibilities to become. They all seem so interesting. So again, you are still in plain wood stage. You still haven't been shaped into something. So what happened back then when you think about the life that you will live? We think about the life in terms of a path that we will take. Like, what do you want to do with your life? What are you going to be when you grow up? That question comes up a lot. So we're all kind of different when we approach this particular question. Some of us, a few of us, figure out pretty early. Like, I talk to people who have always known that they wanted to be a painter or a musician or something, which, you know, some of them eventually become, but not always. So some figure it out early. At the other end of the spectrum, some never figure it out. They're not sure. They're constantly searching for what they ought to do, what they ought to be. So that's I would say that's a state of misery, to not know what you are intended to be, what you ought to be, what your destiny is. So what about the people who are blessed with many different talents? Well, a lot of them, they can have a primary career and a lot of secondary hobbies, but those are the blessed ones. So out of humanity, of which we are a part, there are so many different ways to live one's life. So let's continue on. What happens after childhood? As your life unfolds, it oftentimes doesn't go in an ideal direction as you might have wished. Here, I have a teenager who's sitting alone, feeling rather depressed. So first, think about what a difference that is from the infants, from the state of the infants. This happens because you are increasingly affected by worldly existence. So remember what happened as you were going through your teenage years? Well, you or your teenage friends are likely to acquire this cool facade. And you can still see this today with the teens around you right now. You can see the same cool facade that you had when you were a teen. It's a facade of apathy and boredom. Think about how often you hear a teenager say, I don't care. Shrug, I don't care. Now remember, that's what you and your teenage friends back in your teenage years, that's what you used to say. And if not you, certainly your friends. I don't care. Apathy. And then boredom. I'm bored. How often do we hear that from teens? Well, for me, all the time. So we perhaps forget that when we were young, either we ourselves or our friends were also like that, bored all the time. So depression sets in. So you, as a teen, you express more cynicism, negativity, and complaints. So already as a teen, not even an adult, you've already gone past the stage of infancy and childhood when once upon a time you were happy and now you are depressed. You're depressed and you're cynical and you're negative. You're negative about different things. That sucks is another commonly heard expression from teens. Complaints. This sucks. Common complaints from teens. So many teens end up with attachments. Perhaps you did as well. Some of these attachments manifest as material desires, even obsessions and addictions. So whatever happened to Pooh, the plain wood, the point of maximum potential that you had as an infant and retained mostly as a young child? What happened to that? Well, over time, shaped by the environment, whereas once as an infant, it seemed like possibilities were unlimited for you. As you get older, those possibilities get whittled away, a little bit at a time. Options and possibilities decrease as the years come and go. The older you get, the more restrictive it seems that your options and possibilities become. So you're no longer the plain wood. You're not Pooh anymore. You are gradually being shaped into something, by your friends, by the environments, by society, by the media that you consume, by the idea that other people put into your heads. So the alarming thing is that this process may or may not be guided by yourself. You're not necessarily in charge. A lot of the ideas put in your head by society, you might not have had a say in allowing that. So you're not the plain wood, you're being shaped into something, but you are not necessarily the craftsman who's doing the shaping. Your external environment, the people you come across, they play a part in that shaping as well. So this is also part of your life. This is also what you have experienced. So let's talk about now. Let's talk about this journey starting from infancy through childhood, through teenage years to this moment in time. Where you are today. Well, first of all, you've been traveling a long time on a particular path that brings you to here and now, right? You still remember that you used to dream about becoming something great, and perhaps that dream faded with time. along the way, you've been working to maximize the potential that you started out with, back when your possibilities seem endless and completely unlimited. But today, you have, as an adult, you've been shaped into something that's much more specific. Maybe a tool, maybe a container, and so on. When I say a tool, I mean that as like a cog in the corporate machinery. You are a small part in this giant societal machinery in which you function as something. So perhaps in moments of quiet contemplation, you can sort of get back in touch with a sense of loss, that what you had before as a child, you're not sure where that is anymore. You've lost a certain essence throughout this entire process. So the sages would like to show you how to get that essence back without throwing away everything you have accomplished. So along the way, you've done some very good things. But there's also ideas that you've taken on that you should probably re-examine and let go of. Some of these ideas we've all taken on as we get older. It's time to take another look and see if they are worth keeping. Tao sages will often use a story to remind everyone that our essential humanity is the same, despite external appearances. So remember, when you were a baby, when you were an infant, you did not have all these notions about differences between people, different races, different ethnic origins, different religions, different social classes, difference in wealth, difference in possession, nobility versus commoner, difference in power, people who wield a lot of power and people who are powerless. When you were an infant, you didn't realize that people were that different. You were in touch with your oneness with them. The older you get, though, the more of the illusion is foisted upon you. The more the illusion becomes very strong and gets in your face to show you, to basically shout at you what the differences are between people. So how do we get back? How do we get back from where we are right now to what we used to be? So the stories that sages tell to try to jog people out of their complacency in the here and now is something that I would like to share with you. So that brings me to a story that I have prepared for today. I call it The Rich Man and His Barber. So before I tell you the story, let me invite everyone to listen carefully, and then at the end of the story, I would like to hear what you have to say about the message of this story. So, once upon a time, in ancient China, there was a wealthy man who one day needed a haircut. So he visited his barber. He had known this barber for many years. He's always had his hair cut by this particular barber in town. So two of them have become friends of sorts, so that whenever he needed to trim his hair or beard, as the barber worked on him, they would often chat about the world, about life in general, about people they knew, about the current situation, whatever's in the news. They would often chat as friends. And this day was no different. As the barber worked on him, they began chatting as usual. On this particular day, the wealthy man had something on his mind. So he told the barber, that he had just finished a complete inventory of all of his holdings and properties, of his wealth, basically. He said to the barber, I compare myself to the other wealthy people in town. I have a pretty good idea how much they own. And when I added up everything that I own, I found that I actually own a lot more than they do. I am now the richest man in this entire region, he said. So the barber laughed and said, well, I, on the other hand, am probably one of the poorest people in this entire region. I'll tell you, if I don't work, I am basically not going to eat. My income is limited. I have to rely on my skills. If I get sick and I can't work, I also go hungry. I have almost nothing, unlike you. The rich man says, yes, you are right. You are right. The difference between you and me, I mean, it's like night and day. And the barber then said something that was surprising, even shocking to the rich man. The barber says, well, I reckon the difference between you and me is about 3,000 coins, give or take a few. This was so unexpected that the rich man laughed, pitching forward, and the barber had to quickly take his scissors away, had to quickly stop cutting the hair. The rich man is like, 3,000 coins? He was thinking, well, no wonder the barber is only a barber. Obviously, this barber can't even count. He doesn't even know the difference in wealth between the two of them is in the millions. Maybe he doesn't even know what the difference is between 1,000 and million. So he composed himself sitting in that chair, sitting in the barber's chair, and says, 3,000 coins, how do you figure that? So the barber says, well, I'm around your age. I'm getting old. We're all getting old. So I'm starting to think about how I may not have many more years to live. Just like you, maybe a few more decades if we're lucky, right? And I know that's not a lot of time. So thinking about my demise one day, just out of curiosity, I went to the funeral home not too far away, and I looked at all the coffins that they had. Then then the barber says, like we're talking about, I'm really poor, so I know when I die, my family will buy the least expensive coffin that they offer. And the least expensive one there costs 1,000 coins. So it's not a whole lot more than just a bunch of wooden boards hammered together. It's going to hold my lifeless body as I'm buried, and it's all that my family will be able to afford. So then the barber says, for some reason I thought about you, and I thought, well, what would you get? So from the least expensive, I go to the most expensive coffin. You are such a wealthy man, so I'm pretty sure when you die, your family will buy you the best coffin available. So I looked at all the coffins they had, and I saw the most expensive one. Oh, it's large, it's beautiful, it's prime quality wood, it's very solid. It costs 4,000 coins. It's 4 times as expensive as mine. One of those is worth 4 of mine. 4,000 coins. So thinking about the difference between the two, 4,000 coins for you, 1,000 coins for me. In the end, the difference between you and me is 3,000 coins. That's it. Suddenly, it didn't seem so funny anymore to the rich man. He stopped laughing when he contemplated the truth of the Barber's words. The end. So I want to invite your comments and your thoughts on that story. And I also want to share some thoughts about the idea being expressed from this story told by the sages. So I want to say, first of all, that the Barber is partly right. He's touching on an important truth, so that this story serves as sort of a halfway point. The intention by the sage is to get us to adjust our thinking. As we are mired in the material world, we tend to start taking on the same conventional thought process as most people. In that conventional thought process, full of different levels, separation, inequality, we contemplate ideas like wealth, power, nobility, fame, royalty, worth, deriving from those things. We begin to see people as not the same at all. But the reality is that in the end, aren't we all just a bag of bones? So the truth in the Tao is that we're not so different from one another. Indeed, we're all connected to one another at a fundamental level of reality. So the difference between you and me and the wealthiest man on the planet, in the end, amounts to the difference in cost to put us in the ground when we die. And even more than that, ultimately, beyond the physical, beyond the material, there's no difference at all. So I can definitely see that everyone is on the mental wavelength that I'm trying to describe. Death is the great equalizer. Thank you, Milton. You can take money with you when you're dead. We're all equal in spirit. The rest is an illusion because everything in the material world is in a constant state of change. Thank you, Francis. Wealth is so much more. It's just material wealth. Perspective is everything. And you've never seen a Brinks truck following a hearse. So some context that I'll provide there. Brinks is a security company offering armor trucks. So oftentimes you see armor trucks with Brinks logo stopping at, for instance, a financial institution, collecting money. Armed guards being very careful to transport money from one place to another. Hearse is often used to transport coffins. So the Brinks truck transferring tremendous wealth in terms of money and the hearse become yet another way to talk about what we're talking about here. That disparity. So great. I think everyone is on the same page. Let's continue on. So we've talked about where we are and how the sages can help us make a transformation, adjust our thinking, to get back to the Tao, to get back to how when we used to be like an infant, we had no idea about all this separation, superiority, inferiority, discrimination, wealthy, poor, none of that. Now let's talk about what's ahead of us. Let's talk about the future. Where you are going. So if you are following the path, if you are intending to cultivate the Tao, then one important mission is to return to the state of the infant. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, let's recognize one thing. Let's think about the physical piece of wood that hasn't been worked on. And then let's think about what that piece of wood can become. It can become wooden spoon, bowl, maybe a statue like a figurine. Once you've carved that, shaped it into something, that thing cannot go back to being a piece of plain wood. So that's where we have to understand that it's metaphorical, not to be taken literally, and we're not talking about the physical objects at all, but the concept of becoming from something non-specific, very powerful in potentiality, to something that's much, much more specific. So after all, you are a human being for which the plain wood is only a metaphor. The plain wood, having been shaped into something, can go back to being the plain wood, but you are not the same. You do have the ability to regain what you once possessed naturally. So, as we're studying Tao Te Ching 28, it's actually giving us the steps to follow. It's basically telling us that, number one, we have to use yin and yang skillfully. And in the actual sections, it's yang energy supplemented by yin, or knowing the yang, holding on to the yin. So that's the first step. The second step is the watercourse that you heard about. So the idea is to become the receiving end of positive energies in your life. So watercourse, as I pointed out, is the water in the middle of the valley. It's the place where different streams will come together. So by using yin and yang skillfully, you can become like that. You can attract people to you, and then you can receive positive energies naturally. Step number 3, return to the same unlimited potential that you had as an infant. So that's why in all 3 sections, Lao Tzu talks about returning to the state of the infant, returning to Wuji, the unlimited, the unbounded, and returning to Pu. So to do that, it's imperative to reduce, simplify, let go. It's imperative to see through the illusion of separateness and see the reality of oneness. Let's continue on. So what happens when you get there? Now, this is not meant as an ultimate destination. This is more like a way station. This is one of the goals. This is one of the places that you will come across if you travel on the right path. What will happen when you get to a point where you revert back to this state of potentiality? This is really talking about a renewal of the spirit and the reinvention of yourself. And in the Tao, there's no oh, I am too old to change. I am too old to change my ways. That is never a thing in authentic Tao tradition. In the Tao, you can reinvent yourself at any age. You can go back to unlimited potential at any time that you want when you are able to master this particular Tao. So when that is the case, when you reinvent yourself, what happens? Anything you want can happen. There's going to be new possibilities that open up for you, and you can make new choices with insights from your previous experience. So I'm talking about things like reinventing yourself to go in any direction that you deem appropriate for yourself. This is, I have a friend who started learning a new language and musical instruments at the age of 60. He knows what I'm talking about. He knows that regardless of his age, it's never too late to start doing something that he's always wanted to do all his life. So he was studying the Tao, same as me, and it's sort of like he didn't realize that he did not require permission to get going on that. It was only because of his study in the Tao that he came upon this realization that, well, I don't need to wait for anyone. I can reinvent myself and do what I've always wanted to do. So that is the same for everybody who's listening to the sound of my voice. Now, here's an important point. When you reinvent yourself, when you go back to that point of maximum potentiality to shape yourself however you want, this time it's different. This is what I meant when I say that I want to address you specifically, the true essence that is you. This time, it can be different. When you revert back to plain wood, you are now once again engaged in the process of carving and shaping the plain wood that is you. You're shaping it into something specific, something useful, but this time the process is architected and designed by you intentionally. This time, you allow in only as much societal media influence as you deem appropriate. So this time, you are the lead. And in that leading position to reshape your life, you are being assisted by the wisdom of the sages, i.e., the Tao Te Ching passages that we're all studying right now. So this is what it means. Lastly, as a result of doing this, you can reap greater rewards of the achievements you want for yourself, but at the same time, to do it this way means you will not be losing the joy, the fun, the point of it all. So ultimately, that is the reason for us to be doing exactly what we're doing. Okay. So I think the point is made. Now, what we want to do is that we want to continuously look at the following sections, and then for every section, we will be able to tell that it's a reiteration of the main message that you can extract from section 1. So let's take a look at the next section. Know the white, hold to the black. Be the standard of the world. Being the standard of the world, the eternal virtue does not deviate. Return to the state of the boundless. So first, it's important to realize that this is restating the same process in a different way from a slightly different perspective. So first, let me spend some time on the white and the black. So the white in this context denotes the high profile, that which is highly visible, obvious, or at the surface level, like an external manifestation. So you can also think of that as the state of material success and fame. This is when things are going really well, you have a high profile. You've assumed a high profile. So to know what it's like, and that brings a challenge all its own. So when things are going well, there's a challenge associated with doing well. Can anyone venture to guess what those challenges might be? I'll pause for a moment. So the question is, when things are going well in your life, there can be challenges associated with that. So question for everyone, what might be some of those challenges that come along when things are going well and you have a highly visible career, perhaps, highly visible profile? Okay, so one possibility is to say that your success can drive you to arrogance, or another way is to say that the egocentrism that you've always had can now come to the surface and manifest itself. So the ego also becomes more obvious, more visible to others. So when you want to know the high profile, you want to know the potential pitfalls of the profile, of the high profile. So as Carol is pointing out, you may begin to start thinking like the rich man in the story. Yet another factor that goes into it is that when you have more, when you attain more success, you begin to get more to worry about. You begin to have more to lose. So that means a higher stress level. And it also means that you potentially can neglect the important things in life, like family, health, and spirituality. So the challenge is to stay humble, as John is pointing out right now. So let's talk about the other part too, the black, the less visible, the low profile, the subtle approach, the unseen or unnoticed. So in the example that we just had, you know, the high profile wealthy man, the low profile barber, you know, someone who provides him with service, they each have their own challenges. So for the barber in our story, the challenge is not so much complacency or arrogance. The challenge is more like survival, making enough to eat, and just making it through another day. Hopefully not get sick, not get injured, so you can continue to work. It's a different set of challenges. So in Mandarin, we say 顺考 versus 逆考. 顺考 is the test when everything is going smoothly. Then all kinds of challenges occur, exactly like we said, where things are neglected, families neglected, etc. And then 逆考, like the barber situation, where things are not going so well, there's a lot of obstacles, setbacks, and you're trying to make it through another day just to survive. And you need you oftentimes will need spiritual guidance to help you through all of that. So, to be a master of the Tao, it is imperative that you master both the visible as well as the not so visible. The challenges that come with great success, as well as the challenges of survival. And not only do you need to master these two aspects of yin and yang, but you also need to recognize it in other people. That other people have similar challenges. It's just that they come at it from a different direction. So I'm seeing some really great suggestions. The Tao is about not forgetting where you came from, staying true to yourself. Will this be part of the black? Yes. If you think about how being true to yourself is an internal aspect of cultivation, that you want to hold to it. It is not something that people can see. Perhaps you have humble beginnings. So you can easily imagine that when someone becomes successful, that they want to obscure humble origins, whereas a Tao cultivator, when that person becomes successful, actually will be the opposite, to take pride in humble beginnings, to not forget where they came from, to love all the places that they have been to, all the people that they have encountered, all the people that helped them along the way, whereas someone who doesn't know the Tao may perhaps prefer to forget, where they came from and the people who helped them along the way. Childhood friends, neighbors you've had when you were little, when you were poor, etc. That's very much a part of it. So let's bring that in as an example. Let me just make it a little more concrete here. When everything's going well, you have a high profile, you are highly visible. That's one way to explain the high profile white, quote unquote. Yet another interpretation is to think of white as the visible approach, when you want to solve an issue in a way that's visible to everyone else. And as we were talking about, this approach brings its own challenges. As an example, you can become rather arrogant. You may assume that you are single-handedly responsible for your own success. You may assume that it's because of my own greatness that I am successful. Whereas for the authentic Tao cultivator, they will oftentimes talk about how when heaven decides to give you a little bit, meaning the Tao, when you receive a goodness from the Tao, just a little bit from the Tao perspective is more than human beings can actually utilize. It's so much more that we, limited human beings, can use, because the Tao is infinite. So a small part of the Tao in our lives is like way too much. People who don't understand that, who forget that, will assume that, well, I did it all myself. It was all my work. I take full credit. All right, so we are partway through the second section, which speaks to the same yin and yang duality, the complementary duality, as the first section. So with the amount of time that we have left, I want to cover the summary. The summary, I think, makes it clearer on what we need to focus on. So let me jump to the summary now. So the summary is called the basic pattern of Tao cultivation. In this chapter, it's illustrated 3 different times: section 1, section 2, section 3. And the first one, of course, is to return to the state of the infant. But let's talk about step 1. Step 1 master the yin and yang concept. In the first section, step 1 is about knowing the masculine while holding on to the feminine. Holding to the yang. Know the yang, hold on to the yin. So important point. It's never one or the other. It's got to be both. You must have both. You must have both the yang energy and the yin. You must bring them together in a harmonious balance and use them skillfully. So here we go. Know the dynamic while holding on to the serene. So one way to say it is that you want to engage in actions while remaining calm. Hold on to the yin, remain calm. That gives you the best chance of accomplishing whatever it is that you are setting out to do. One example that I have used in the past is about a very successful basketball player who was known for being able to, sink baskets at clutch time when it truly matters. And when people ask him about his secret, he said that, well, when he's on the court, his body's in motion, he's very active, there's a lot of dynamic things happening all around him, people moving around. But as he's moving, his body may be in very fast and very extremely athletic motion, but his mind is still. His mind is serene and tranquil. And that is how he can maintain control and be able to sink those baskets, those crucial baskets for the score. So that would be one way to talk about this whole idea of knowing the yang, but hold on to the yin. Step 2, become the nexus of positive energies. In the first section, this is described as being the watercourse, which is where the different streams will all flow into. In the second section, we haven't gotten to it yet, but next time we'll talk about being the standard or the example. In the third section, also for next time, it talks about being the valley. So the valley contains many different living things. The valley has the spaciousness representing tolerance of mind to contain different ideas, to have a wide diversity of perspectives. And number 3, return to the simplicity of the Tao. Again, we have 3 different ways to express that. In the first one that we looked at, this is expressed as returning to the infant, the state that is associated with your true essence, the pure you, I like to say. In the second section, it talks about returning to Wuji, the ultimate state of spiritual liberation. In previous talks, you saw the cosmology, the Tao cosmology, where Wuji was the primal state that evolves into Taiji, the void, to evolving into something, evolving into creation. And lastly, plain wood, that is in the third section, which ties back into the first one. So plain wood, I've linked it to infancy, and plain wood represents the highest state of your potential. So these are the steps in Tao cultivation. We have to apply this in every aspect of our lives as we continue down this path together.
Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.